The air was warm and golden as the Harrison family pulled into the gravel driveway. The summer sun shimmered through the windshield, and the scent of pine and fresh earth drifted through the open windows of their SUV. Julia Harrison leaned out. From the passenger seat, eyes wide with wonder. "There it is," she whispered, almost reverently. "Our new home." The house sat on a gentle rise, a two-story craftsman with faded blue shutters and a wide porch that begged for rocking chairs. The lawn was overgrown, wildflowers tangled with weeds, and the paint on the front door peeled in lazy curls. But it had bones, history, and charm. Behind the house, visible even from the road, rose a tree so tall it seemed to touch the sky. It was a massive oak, its thick limbs spreading in all directions like the arms of a giant welcoming them home. Moss clung to the base of the trunk, and hundreds of years' worth of leaves crunched gently underfoot. Their youngest, Ellie, just 6, ran toward the tree with glee. "It's like a fairy tale tree," she cried. Julia followed with a smile while her husband, Ben Harrison, climbed out and took a long, measured look at the land behind the house. The property stretched for nearly 10 acres, dipping into a shaded ravine and curling around a small patch of forest. The oak stood right at the edge of the wild. Ben walked to the tree and placed his hand against the bark. It was rough and cool, solid as stone. "Wow," he said softly. "This one's been here a long, long time." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the dusk, their new neighbors came to greet them. The Hanleys from up the road, Mr. Jameson from the corner, and Leila Preston, who used to own the antique store in town. "Beautiful place," Leila said with a smile, nodding at the view. "But that old oak? I'm surprised the realtor didn't mention it. Most folks say you ought to cut it down." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Storm hazard," Mr. Jameson offered. "Roots. Too close to the house. Limbs that big? One windstorm, and it could take out your roof. And the insurance companies hate trees like that." "But it's incredible," Julia said. "It must be hundreds of years old," Lila nodded slowly. "Oh, it is. Some say it was planted before the town was even founded. But it's big, and it's old, and people worry." Ben looked back at the tree, its dark silhouette rising against the moonlight. It looked immovable, eternal. "We'll think about it," he said, but deep down, he already knew. He wouldn't be cutting that tree down over the next few weeks. The family settled in. The kids, Ellie and her older brother Luke, explored the ravine and played in the branches of the oak. Ben started restoring the barn and fixing the porch steps. Julia planted a herb garden and painted Ellie's room sunshine yellow, and always, in the background, the oak watched over them. "Do you ever feel like it's alive?" Julia asked one morning as they sipped coffee under its shade. Ben grinned. "It is alive. No, I mean watching. Like it remembers things, like it's waiting." Ben looked up at the limbs overhead, the way the sunlight filtered through the green. He didn't laugh. "I do," he said. The rain started late. That summer. At first, just showers and gentle storms. Then longer, heavier downpours. The creek that ran through the ravine began to swell. "Should we be worried?" Julia asked one evening as thunder rolled in the distance. "Nah," said Mr. Jameson, waving it off when they stopped by the store. "The ravine's flooded before. But you're high enough up. Just don't go hiking down there when the ground's soaked." But the rain didn't stop. Day after day, sheets of water pounded the roof. The garden drowned. The wildflowers vanished beneath the mud. And still the oak stood, unmoved. Ben began to worry. Not about the tree, but about the land, the creek, the ravine. "Maybe we ought to take a trip to town this weekend," he said one evening as they watched the lightning flash across the hills. "Just in case," Julia frowned. "We'll see. The kids are finally settling in, and I don't want them scared." That night Ben couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, he went out onto the porch. The rain was softer now, but steady. He looked out at the land, lit in silver moonlight, and he saw the water. It wasn't just in the ravine anymore. It had risen fast. The next morning, the phones buzzed with alerts. Flash flood warnings, road closures. The rain returned in force, and the wind began to howl. Julia packed a bag. Luke charged the flashlights. Ellie clutched her stuffed bear, but by then, it was too late. The creek had become a river. A torrent of brown water rushed up the slope, swallowing the footpath and rushing toward the house like a living thing. "Everyone to the car!" Ben shouted. But the car was already half submerged. "Then we go up," Julia said, grabbing Ellie's hand. They ran through the side yard, toward the oak. Water lapped at their ankles, then knees. The ground slipped beneath their feet. Mud sucked at their boots. Ben lifted Ellie onto his back. Luke clambered forward. The rain was deafening now, the wind a roar in the trees. And then the tree reached it first, gripping the bark. "Climb!" he shouted. One by one, they scrambled up, onto the lower limbs, then higher. The oak groaned but held. Below, the water surged past, full of branches, mud, and debris. The house, their new home, was a blur behind the torrent, but the tree held. And for hours, they clung there, wet, cold, but alive. When the storm passed, and the water began to fall, and the sun broke through the clouds at last, Ben pressed his hand once more to the bark of the old oak. "Thank you," he whispered. And the tree, silent and strong, simply stood. The morning after the flood, the world stood still. A low mist clung to the hills, and the rising sun cast pale gold over the soaked earth. The oak tree, its limbs drenched and leaves dripping, cradled the Harrison family like a guardian. From their perch on the thick lower branches, they looked out over a landscape transformed. Where there had once been a path to the ravine, there was now a jagged gash of earth, still oozing water. Their backyard was unrecognizable, a twisted, muddy lake filled with debris. The house was intact, though its lower floor had taken on water. The porch railing was gone. Julia blinked at it in disbelief. "I can't believe we're alive," she whispered. Ben didn't answer right away. He was staring at the oak's thick trunk, one arm still wrapped protectively around Ellie, who had fallen asleep sometime during the long night. Luke shivered beside him. "It held," he said. "The tree didn't even crack." Ben nodded. "It knew where to grow. It knew how to survive." By late morning, the neighbors came trudging through the muck, their boots heavy with mud and worry. Leela Preston arrived. First, bundled in a raincoat and holding a thermos of tea. "My God," she breathed when she saw the family climbing down from the tree. "You were up there all night?" Julia nodded, her voice trembling. "It saved us." Word spread fast. The Harrisons, trapped by floodwaters, had been rescued not by emergency crews, but by a tree. "I never heard anything like it," said Mr. Jameson when the fire department finally arrived. "That old oak's a hero now." The firefighters did their checks and offered rides to the temporary shelter in town, but the Harrisons chose to stay. Their house was damaged but not destroyed. They would clean. They would rebuild, and they would stay near the tree. The following days were a blur of wet clothing, borrowed tools, and unexpected kindness. Volunteers helped shovel the mud from the basement. Julia organized donations for others in town who hadn't been so lucky. Luke joined a group of teens helping to clear roads. And every evening, Ben walked to the oak and sat beneath its limbs. Sometimes he just listened. Sometimes he spoke. "I don't know how to thank you," he said one evening, his hand resting on the bark, "but I'll protect you. As long as I live." He wasn't sure why he said it aloud, but it felt right. Then came the attention. A local news crew showed up within a week. The headline ran across the screen that evening: Family rescued by 300-year-old oak during flash flood. They took video of the tree, of the soaked Harrison home, of the family telling their story on the porch. A gentle piece, almost poetic, but the next day, the calls started, reporters, researchers, even a professor from the state university who specialized in historic flora. One man wanted to take a core sample. Another offered to buy the land. We could sell the story, Julia said, half joking, half exhausted. We could pay for repairs, and then some. Ben looked troubled. But what would that mean? Would they try to manage it, study it, build a fence around it, and put up plaques? It's just a tree, she replied softly. But Ben shook his head. No, Jules, it's not. A week later, a man in a tailored suit knocked on their door. Mr. Harrison? He asked. My name is Andrew Wilcox. I represent a development firm, Silver Ridge Projects. We've been following the news about your remarkable tree. Ben was immediately on edge. And? Wilcox smiled. We'd like to make you an offer, a generous one. We're purchasing land in this area for a planned retreat, eco-friendly, minimal footprint, very exclusive. And a story like yours? That tree could be our icon. We'd preserve it, promote it, turn it into a symbol of natural resilience. Ben raised an eyebrow. You mean build cabins around it? Wilcox chuckled. You make it sound worse then. It is. We'd honor its history. Name the retreat after it. The Old Oak Sanctuary. Sound catchy? Ben said nothing. Julia stood behind him, watching. I'll leave the papers with you, Wilcox said. No pressure. But I think you'll find the figure hard to ignore. And then he left. The figure was high. Very high. That night, the house was quiet except for the hum of crickets and the occasional drip of water from the basement. Ben and Julia sat at the kitchen table in silence. Luke and Ellie were asleep upstairs. We could fix everything, Julia said at last. Not just patch it, make it better than before. You could rebuild your workshop. I could reopen the studio. Ben stared at the offer, but we'd have to let them in. They said they'd keep the tree. Ben's eyes were heavy. You believe that? Julia said nothing. He rose, slowly, and stepped outside. The night was cool, and the air smelled faintly of damp bark and fallen leaves. He walked through the soft grass, up the path where the ground still bore scars from the flood. And then he stood before the oak. He placed his palm against the bark. What should I do? He whispered. The wind rustled through the leaves above. And for a moment, he thought he heard it again, not words exactly, but something deeper. A low, ancient stillness that seemed to say, I have stood through storms. I have held the ground when others ran. I do not belong to men with pens and promises. Ben closed his eyes. The next morning, he tore up the contract. A few days later, he returned the call from the university professor, not with an agreement, but with a counteroffer. You can visit, he said, but you won't touch it. No drilling, no samples, no PR stunts. You want to study it, you do it with your eyes and ears, not with saws. The professor agreed. Later that month, a small article ran in the local paper. Harrison family chooses stewardship over profit, and below it, a photo of the tree, its great limbs reaching out in silent triumph. Ben clipped the article and placed it on the mantel. Then he went outside, sat beneath the tree, and leaned back against the trunk. Above him, the leaves danced gently in the breeze, and for the first time since the flood, he felt something new in his chest. Peace. By early fall, Maple Ridge began to dry out. The roads were mostly repaired, the floodwater long receded, and the scars in the land softened under September grass. But for the Harrison family, something deeper had shifted, something more than just the mud-smeared floors or the patched walls of their home. Their lives had taken root. Ben stood at the edge of the property, hands on his hips, gazing toward the old oak. It was more than a tree now. It was memory, anchor, a presence. He had begun rising early each morning, just to sit beneath its limbs with coffee and silence. There, he listened to the quiet whisper of the breeze through the leaves. Sometimes, Ellie joined him, curled in a blanket and resting her head against his shoulder. Sometimes Luke brought a book and leaned his back against the trunk. Dot had become their center. One Saturday, Ben found an envelope in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a letter written in delicate cursive. "Dear Mr. Harrison, my name is Ruth Connolly. I grew up in your house, though back then it was just a farmhouse without paint. The oak in your backyard, my grandfather planted it. At least that's what he used to say. He called it the Watcher. When I saw your story in the paper, I cried. I never thought anyone would understand what that tree meant, but you do. Thank you for keeping it safe. If you ever find a carved heart near the east side of the trunk." That was me and my brother back in 1948. With warmest thoughts, Ruthben held the letter in his hands for a long time. Later that day, he walked around to the east side of the trunk. There it was, faint, weathered by rain and time, but still there, a heart carved in two childish arcs. He touched it gently and whispered, "I see it." As word of the Harrison tree spread, the town changed. Children came on school field trips. Locals visited on Sunday walks. A small wooden bench appeared near the base of the oak one morning, carved with the words, "Stand still long enough, and the world speaks." Ben didn't know who had made it, but he left it there. One afternoon, a woman with a clipboard knocked on the door. She introduced herself as Nancy Herrera, a conservation advocate from the State Department. "Mr. Harrison, I'd like to propose something," she said. "There's a program we're working on designating living landmarks. Your oak would be perfect. It would receive protected status, grants, expert care." Ben hesitated. "That sounds like bureaucracy. I'm not sure I want tourists and fences around it." Nancy shook her head. "No fences, no tours, just recognition. And resources to help keep it healthy for generations." Julia joined them. On the porch, "What's the catch?" "None. It stays yours. It just becomes acknowledged." Ben thought for a long moment. "I'll consider it," he said. "But only if it's about the tree, not about turning it into something. It's not." Nancy smiled. "That's exactly the point." Meanwhile, at home, things were shifting to Dot. Luke had become quieter since the flood. He still helped around the house, but spent more time alone. Ben found him one evening sitting on the lowest branch of the oak, staring out at the horizon. "You okay, bud?" Ben asked. Luke nodded, but didn't speak. Ben climbed up beside him. The branch swayed slightly under their weight. "I think I was scared," Luke said after a while. "More than I wanted to admit. When the water came, I thought that was it." Ben said nothing, just placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "But this tree, it didn't let go. And now, I don't know, I feel like I owe it something." Ben smiled. "I think we all do." Luke turned to him. "Do you think we could build a little platform up here? Nothing fancy. Just somewhere to sit, read, think." Ben's eyes lit up. "I think that's a great idea." That weekend, father and son worked side by side, cutting planks and measuring branches. Julia brought lemonade. Ellie made a "No grown-ups allowed unless invited" sign in bright glitter paint. By Sunday, the little platform was done, a simple wooden deck about 8 feet up, supported by thick, patient limbs. They called it the nest. And in the evenings, as the crickets chirped and the leaves rustled like whispers, the family took turns retreating to the nest, each of them finding peace in the quiet arms of the tree. But peace does not always go untested. Late in October, the storms returned, not flood level, but fierce enough to rattle the windows and snap small branches. The power flickered. The winds howled, and one night they heard it a crack like a gunshot in the dark. Ben leapt from bed, heart racing. He threw on boots, grabbed a flashlight, and ran into the night. The oak was still standing, but one of its massive limbs, one that shaded the southern side of the house, had fallen. It lay stretched across the yard, splintered at the joint. Ben fell to his knees beside it, staring at the pale heartwood exposed by the break. The next morning, Ellie cried when she saw it. "Is the tree dying?" Ben shook his head. "No, sweetie, just changing. Sometimes even the strongest things have to let go of pieces of themselves." Julia knelt beside them. "We'll use the wood. Maybe for something special." Ben nodded. "A bench, maybe a table." And so, from the fallen limb, they built a seat for the nest, a place to rest and remember. That winter, the nest became their refuge. Snow blanketed the hills, and icicles hung from the oak's limbs like crystal lanterns. The family gathered with blankets and cocoa, watching the woods fall silent. The tree, even wounded, held strong. Ben began carving into a small piece of the fallen branch. Letters, slowly, over many nights dot by spring, it was finished a plaque. For the nest, nailed gently to one of the cross beams, it read, "For those who weather storms and still reach toward the sky." Spring came slowly to Maple Ridge, unfurling leaf by leaf, as if the land itself were remembering how to breathe again. The ravine, once torn open by water and fear, now cradled wildflowers in its cracks. The hillside softened, green returned to the pastures, and birds filled the mornings with their simple, hopeful songs. The old oak bloomed, its new leaves shimmered in the April light, as if untouched by storm or time. The branch that had fallen no longer seemed like a loss. It had become part of the nest, of the bench, of the plaque that now welcomed every visitor who climbed up seeking quiet. Ben sat there one morning, coffee in hand, eyes closed, letting the sun warm his face through the canopy. From up high, the world looked slower, softer, truer. And then, through the stillness, came the sound of tires on gravel. He climbed down to find a black SUV parked in the driveway, sleek and polished, with a government plate. A woman stepped out, wearing hiking boots and a wide smile. "Mr. Harrison?" She called. "Renee Caldwell, U.S. Forest Service. I'm here about the living landmark designation." Ben met her at the porch. Julia came out with 2 mugs of coffee, always one step ahead. "I've read your file," Renee said. "But standing here in front of it, that tree is something else." Ben nodded. "We think so too." She spent most of the morning walking the property, taking quiet notes and photos. When she returned, her face was lit with reverence. "I've evaluated trees in California, Oregon, even ancient cypresses in Louisiana. But this is different. There's a presence to it. Like it remembers more than we do." Ben smiled. Gently, "It does. We'll approve the designation," she said. "It'll be listed as a National Living Landmark by summer. You'll have access to grants for care and preservation, but it'll stay yours. No restrictions unless you want them." Ben's heart swelled with something between relief and gratitude. "It's not ours," he said softly. "We just get to live near it." The town held a small ceremony in June. Neighbors brought food. The local school's music class performed under the branches. Leela Preston read a poem. Ruth Conley, the woman who'd written to Ben that fall, came in a wheelchair, her hand resting on her granddaughter's arm. When they rolled her up to the trunk, she reached out with frail fingers and touched the bark. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. Ben stood nearby, watching, his heart thick with something wordless. After the crowd left, Ben climbed up to the nest alone. He sat on the bench made from the fallen branch and gazed out across the land. Below, the house was quiet, lit from within. Ellie was helping Julia bake something that smelled like cinnamon. Luke sat on the porch with a book. The wind moved through the leaves above him, a soft breath that stirred memories. And in that moment, something shifted in his chest, not a realization, exactly, but a truth made clearer than ever before. This tree had not only saved them once during a flood. It had saved them every day since. That summer was the kind that wrote itself into memory. Long evenings under string lights on the porch, laughter echoing through open windows, the nest filled with books, naps, whispers, dreams. Ben built a small journal box into the base of the oak. Visitors left messages there, drawings from children, reflections from strangers, poems. Thank yous. One simply read, I came here heavy, I'm leaving light. Thank you, tree. But nature, in its rhythms, does not give without also taking. In August, another storm came. It didn't start like the last one. No warnings, no sirens. Just a sudden shift. Clear skies darkened, wind rose, and then rain fell like a curtain tearing across the hills. Ben was outside repairing a fence when he saw the creek surge. His heart stopped. He sprinted toward the house, yelling, inside. Now, Julia gathered Ellie. Luke grabbed flashlights. They rushed toward the storm shelter they'd built beneath the stairs. A lesson from last time. But as Ben stepped onto the porch, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A group of hikers, 3 teenagers, unfamiliar, had wandered up from the ravine. Now trapped by rising water. They were shouting for help, waving from the far side. Ben didn't think. He grabbed a rope, slung it across his shoulder, and ran back into the rain. The water was faster now, higher, sweeping over the trail. But the tree stood a head tall, defiant, unwavering. Get to the oak. Ben shouted. The teens hesitated, then saw him point, saw the great limbs stretching out like arms calling them home. They followed. He threw them the rope, helped them cross, one by one, bracing himself on a root. Just as the last girl reached him, the water surged, nearly knocking them both down. But the tree's roots held. They grabbed hold of the bark, climbed, just like his family had, once before. And again, the oak held them. Hours later, the rain faded. The storm passed. And once again, the old tree had stood between danger and safety. One of the teens, soaked and shivering, turned to Ben and asked, How did you know it would hold? Ben looked up at the canopy, the bark streaked with rain and strength. Because it always has, he said. That night, after everyone was safe and dry, and the house hummed with quiet relief, Ben returned to the nest. He lit a candle, held it close to his chest. Thank you, he whispered again. Above him, the leaves rustled gently. And in the silence that followed, he understood that the tree didn't just live behind the house anymore. It lived inside them, in every breath, every story, every decision not to run, but to stay rooted. The storm had tested them again, but the roots had held.